Hello and welcome to another episode of the Live Thrivingly podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Hall, and I'm super excited to have you here today. Wherever you are in the world, I invite you to pause, take a breath, and tune in as we illuminate stories and perspectives that explore what it means to truly thrive. This season, we continue our journey, part of the larger Live Thrivingly project, to unpack the human condition, celebrate cultural insights, and share interpretations of life from voices across the globe. From personal awakenings to ancestral wisdom, from daily rituals to paradigm-shifting ideas, we're here to explore what it truly means to live thrivingly, with depth, presence, and a devotion to restoring wholeness in our lives and communities.
Today's guest is an extraordinary human being I had the pleasure of crossing paths with in February 2025 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is the Executive Director of Tracker Certification North America, President of CyberTracker North America Steering Committee, and played an integral role in the founding of CyberTracker Europe. A senior tracker and CyberTracker evaluator, he works internationally to train and certify biologists, research teams, ecotourism guides, and the general public. Over the past 16 years, he has conducted more than 200 evaluations and led trainings in 8 countries. As an external evaluator, he also oversees track and sign specialist evaluations, one of the highest levels of recognition in the field. Casey is also a co-author of several major field guides, including the Peterson Field Guide to North American Bird Nests, Bird Feathers, a Guide to North American Species, and the updated second edition of Mammal Tracks and Sign, a Guide to North American Species. I met him during my first ever track and sign evaluation with CyberTracker North America, a platform developed to teach and assess wildlife tracking and trailing skills. Originating in Africa and now globally recognized as a powerful tool for learning about wildlife and landscapes. Whether you're a passionate nature lover or a professional conservationist, CyberTracker's approach helps preserve and evolve this ancient art form while deepening our understanding of the natural world. He quite literally spends his life walking through the woods and along the waters of North America, educating and evaluating others in the art of tracking, an ancient skill he believes is not only vital to protecting our natural resources, but also essential to understanding our interrelationships with the land, the animals, and ultimately ourselves. When I first arrived in the cool, foggy river bottom of New Mexico's Bosque system along the Rio Grande, I was immediately captivated by his ability to articulate how tracking impacts us internally beyond its clear ecological and observational value. Since that first meeting, we've spent multiple days together in the field, most recently trailing wildlife and humans for 2 full days in through the backcountry of central Montana. Casey has now become a great friend and mentor, and I'm beyond excited to share his wisdom, depth, and presence with the Live Thrivingly audience today. Get ready to get on track with the one and only Casey McFarland. Hey, morning, Casey. Welcome to the Live Thrivingly podcast. Super excited to have you here today.
It's great to be here, Jackson. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, so what's kind of been up? I've seen you, I think it was around a month ago. We were out in the mountains of Montana, trailing some bear and some humans actually as well on a trailing evaluation.
Yeah, what has been up? Lots. So that was kind of pushing the tail end of a 2.5 month travel stint. And I went from U to Oregon and then started running these certifications through this process that my wife initiated, Ray. And Ray is doing her graduate work, throwing her hat in the ring with the whole predator prey or predator livestock conflict. So she works with all these ranchers across the West, looking at wolves and grizz and their interactions with their cattle and sheep. And throughout this whole process over the last 4 or 5 years, they've expressed interest in doing more of the tracking side of things. And of course, they work with all these agency folks, and everybody's always trying to look at track and sign, and everybody's being like, I know what I'm looking at, and all this stuff. And so Ray started hinting like, oh, maybe you guys should do some legit training. And last year, we started working with groups of ranchers during these big meetings where everybody would get together. And so we'd get ranchers from all over different states in a region, agency folks, they all get together and bitch about stuff and give presentations and just vent. And what was cool about these is that there was the meeting side, and there was this whole aspect of tools that ranchers can use and how they've been working and panels and all this type of stuff. And then we introduced a track and sign training. So we were doing 1-day cyber tracker certifications, and it was so cool. And so that's begun to really grow. And so I went to Oregon after I saw you and spent about, I don't know, 8 or 9 days out there running all over, learning a whole bunch new country, and then working with a couple groups, which was just fascinating because it's working with producers, the folks that are producing livestock, and then
Yeah.
agency folks all side by side, leaning over tracks and sign and actually talking through it and being like, whoa, there's a lot more to this than we thought. And then having discussions with each other about what they're seeing. And that was just so cool. So that was a good way to cap everything off. Tremendous amount of work, but very gratifying. And then I've just been back home. I had to go up to Wyoming to run a couple more just recently. But other than that, I've just been now at the desk catching up with a mountain of the tracker certification, nonprofit admin stuff, and all the things. So
Yeah,
life
man,
is busy.
that sounds awesome though, and super fascinating. Really sounds like what you and your wife have worked with these agencies and these ranchers and stuff to continue, you know, building that ecological field knowledge side, like y'all talk about with the track and sign can really
Yeah.
do. And as you could probably speak more to, is like a pretty big disconnect out there, from a scientific side even too, with this lack of this fundamental track and sign knowledge. And it's quite cool for myself, not really being in the field of conservation or wildlife biology, et cetera, but being very interested in it, just going to one of these cyber tracker track and sign evaluations and just getting back into tracking and understanding there's so much more here than I really thought. And you know, from my side is a little different than what you just did, because you're actually, it's really exercising this skill and how it can be applied to economic driving factors like producers of cattle,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I'm sure we'll dig into this deeply, but you said it very well, and that is that the foundation basically with everybody that I work with, and I have this wonderful privilege of getting to work with all kinds of different folks from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different ways of seeing wildness, of seeing animals, and folks say the same thing. And I don't know what this is, but this particular skill set, this language that is tracking, um, it tends to be very, very misunderstood across all aspects of society. And generally speaking, people are like, "Oh yeah, tracking. That's like when you go out and you look at a track and you identify it, or you look at a sign." If folks even understand really what that means, they're like, "Yeah, you look at like a mark on a tree or something and you identify it." And that is part of it, but it is a very, very small slice. And so what you said is perfect, where when folks come away after a very um, deeply investigative look at all of this different sign and all of these different tracks, and really all of these different relationships and understanding of who animals actually are, people are like, oh, there's a lot more to this than I thought there was. And in the case of working with agency folks and ranching communities, it's just so cool, and it drives it all home in its own particular way. But one of the primary takeaways I think for folks is that, for one, we tend to know a lot less than we thought we did, because we're beginning to recognize the complexity of the skill set and what it reflects. And and then it opens up, on the other side of that coin, it opens up just this huge world of what it means to be an organism that can wander landscapes and really fluently read all kinds of life, doing all kinds of things. And so yeah, it's a super cool skill set.
Yeah, I've just been freaking fascinated with it since I've got kind of reinvested in it. And like you said, I when I originally was exposed to tracking as a kid, I grew up hunting in West Texas and spent a lot of time outdoors. And I've definitely have a I had a lot of experiences in the outdoors to really give me a good basis kind of to work from. But still, it was very simply just kind of like, that's a deer track, that's a bobcat track, that's a hog track.
Yeah.
And I was just, the way I see it now, I was just learning like letters of the alphabet, and it was like, oh, that's an A, that's a B, that's a C. I wasn't learning the words, and then I wasn't developing sentences or complex sentences from those, where I see kind of the progression of the skill set is moving in that direction, just like any other foreign language. Um, and thanks to, you know, people like Boyd Vardy, uh, reading some of his books, being exposed to that is really where I started to open my mind to like, wow, like this is a language, and it's a language I'd like to learn. So
Yeah.
it's been an honor to get to spend time with you on two occasions, uh, and yeah, have you here, to share some more wisdom with us from the field today.
Awesome. Well, the feeling is mutual, Jackson. Uh, Mind if I just share a little story on
Yeah,
something you
let's.
just mentioned?
Yeah,
So, because you just mentioned something very specifically about being like, this is a deer track. Um, I can't remember what all you said,
yeah,
but I keyed in on the deer track. Um, and I love deer for this reason, and working with folks all over, because everybody's seen deer. Everybody has the sense of who deer are broadly. And everybody primarily that spends time outside has seen a deer track. And it's great because a lot of the groups that I work with, we might be looking at some very obscure badger tracks, and people are like, I have no idea what that is. And we get into that, and they're like, oh snap, that's a badger. What? I didn't even realize badgers would be here. That's so cool, blah blah blah. And then in a series of questions, we also had a deer track, and they're like, deer. It's like, cool, and it's like ready to move on. It's like, oh, hold on. And so this last weekend, I ran 2 one-day certifications up in the Tetons, which is just a phenomenal place to be, and working with a group of folks that ranges from some of the ecotourism guides up there to to folks that are involved with monitoring, and they're called nature mappers. And so they're volunteers that go out and do all kinds of different projects. They're doing really cool stuff, checking out pike sign, and doing some pretty thorough data collection. And it's kind of neat. But we had this little teeny dusty trail, just a stretch that was probably, 12 feet long or so, narrow, a foot and a half wide, that had some good dust on it. And so the first morning we were out there, there was a doe that had come through with her little fawn, and they were fairly obscure tracks. They were crisp, they were fresh, but there was a jumble of stuff in there, and and just the way the ground was showing them, it was actually kind of challenging for folks to, they could see the doe track and they're like, that's a deer, but like the little fawn tracks, because they were such a small little fawn and they were in deep dust, they stamped down really well, but the whole front side of the track was obscured, and people came up with all kinds of things about what this could be. But we started working through it, and we're like, okay, cool, who's this? And it was like, wow, that's a fawn, all right, right on. And it was like, well, if this is a fawn, who is this other deer track? And they were like, well, that's that could be mom. And we're like, yeah, right on. Do we see any other deer in here? And we're like, no. And we're like, how big is the biggest buck on the landscape? Is this adult deer track the biggest buck on the landscape? And they're like, I don't think so. I was like, right on. Well, how big is that track? And then it was like, what are does doing out here right now? And some of this was prying on local knowledge, because it's like, okay, what do deer do? And when does start dropping fawns, they separate from one another, and they're often just with their doe and their fawn for a while before they start grouping back up. And they're like, and I was like, well, who's seen does and fawns? Are they grouped up again, or you still seeing them in just doe fawn couplets or triplets, and they're like, yeah, that. And I was like, right on. Okay. So it's not just about the evidence on the ground. We're filtering the evidence on the ground through what we know about animals. And so we had this whole discussion about this and behavioral changes, and how, when we understand some of those things, it helps us make sense of what we're seeing. And it was just kind of a cool day. And then we actually went down, dropped down into this river corridor and looked at a bunch of stuff. And then when we came back up, a little red fox had come through right on top of those tracks. And so that was just kind of
That's
fun. We
awesome.
talked about all this. But then the next day, it was great, because in that same spot of dust, the afternoon winds pick up and it wiped it clean. And then these two other deer came through, and I had a new group. And I was like, all right, who's this? And they're like, deer. And then we talked about, all right, well, how do deer move? What's their typical walking pattern? How far is that? Because it was a jumble of stuff. It was tough to see, but we were able to really quickly filter out, like, oh, cool, there's a front and a hind right here and a front and a hind right here. That's not how deer walk. We immediately know there's two deer here. And then we're like, right on. Well, what are deer doing right now? And they're like, well, the fawns and the does are hanging out with each other, with themselves, and then what are the males doing? It's like, well, yeah, they're grouped up in little bachelor groups right now. And it was like, cool. Well, how are these deer really different in size, or are they similar in size? And they're like, similar in size. And I was like, do you think this is does without fawns, or who could it be? And they're like, could this be young bucks? And I was like, it could be young bucks. That's probably who this is. And so it was just so cool. It's just some deer tracks on the ground, and yet every time we see your deer tracks, it's like, who are these deer? Is this does and followers? Is this a bachelor herd? What are they doing on the landscape right now? And so we worked through all the stuff, and then it was so cool at the end of the day when we were walking out, we spooked up these two little bucks, and we are like, awesome. Are these the guys that made the tracks? Maybe,
Yeah.
very likely. And now we have this connection. And so people were just like, oh, these tracks actually belong to individuals that have so much more to tell us, not only about the tracks themselves, but about behavior, and really beginning to push our understanding of animals. And it's just such a cool thing. So it was really fun.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I remember when I first met you in New Mexico on the evaluation in Albuquerque when we were down there in the Bosque along the Rio. Um, you had asked a question about a raccoon track, and we're like,
Oh, right.
how could you find this animal again on the landscape? Like, how could you potentially identify it again? And it was a really great question because it made everyone really dive deeper into not just what was the animal or what its gait pattern was, but like what specifics could you find in the track? And there was something like with its toe or something that was kind of like splayed, that had been injured or something. And
Exactly.
we
Yep.
picked that out. And I think it was around that same question that you said, the words, questions guide our eyes. And what you just also pointed to with all these questioning, I think, it guides our eyes, and it guides our minds to greater levels of understanding and the ability to observe and interpret a wider array of things, I feel like. And I just had that down here to kind of expand upon, and I think it links well
Nice.
to what you just said. And I like how I noticed how it not only applied in my tracking evaluation to help me interpret, track, and sign and try to get a good score, but also how that transfers into our personal lives, into our
Yep.
careers, in the way we critically think and problem solve and brainstorm and speculate and deduct and those kind of things. So
Awesome. Yeah, it's so true. So true. Yeah. Um, well, that'll be fun to delve into the latter part of what you just said. But yeah, one of the most interesting aspects of this skill set, tracking in particular, and being a very, very old skill set among hominids, um, it and this gets into this whole aspect of culture as well, where we don't just learn, we don't just grow up and by the time we can start looking at tracks, understanding what tracks mean. It is a cultural container. It is a skill set, like so many other aspects of being human, that um, to have a container for people to help us see information by developing our own line of questioning. And so the way I always frame that is that the only thing that makes someone who's very fluent or very competent in wildlife tracking ability different than someone who is not is that the person that has that capacity just has an arsenal of questions to be asking and the right questions about whatever it is that we're looking at. And in the case of the deer, it's just simply, we start just with the general look of the track. But a lot of times when folks are new to this, they'll actually think a deer track may be going the other direction. So just simple stuff like, which direction is this going? And they're like, that way. And you're like, okay, cool, let's talk about it. And then people are like, oh, clearly that all makes sense. Now I can understand that. But then where this stuff starts getting really cool are those behavioral questions where we start saying, is this the biggest buck on the landscape? And then every question that we ask reshifts how we see, and information that was there the whole time was literally just invisible. It does not reveal itself until we have the questions. And it is one of the reasons that I love this particular skill, is because every single thing that we look at, and this is why people get so fired up about it, no matter where they're coming from, is that it all just starts with a mark on the ground. But then as we ask question after question after question, that mark just keeps growing in meaning and significance. And people are like, whoa, that's badass. And what's so cool about that too is that very quickly that understanding of things helps folks realize the sheer potential that they have, and that they're actually, we can learn this stuff really, really quickly. And it just makes us feel good when we start understanding that and being like, oh, this is very, very complex, but it's also very simple when we just have that line of questioning. And we're really developing that more than anything. And so, yeah, and it is cool to think about that in our personal lives. Honestly, I think I'm probably better at it in tracks than I am in my personal life, but it's so true. I mean, that's how everything works. It's our
Yeah.
ability to ask questions that allows us to mature and grow.
Yeah, the way I've seen it since, just recently really getting into tracking in a big way, and reading up on it, and people like yourself and Boyd Vardy and other people I've been meeting on these track and trailing events, when I come back home and I go back into my family business, we're in the roofing and construction
Mm,
business, and I have a synthesizing mind by nature. So I'm constantly creating parallels and connecting dots between diverse topics and stuff. So I'm immediately come back in the container of the business after a weekend in Montana or a weekend in New Mexico, and I start to kind of look at things differently. And something that's fascinating about the roofing industry, specifically in the US, is there's a lot of damage that happens to roofs in the US, mainly because a lot of roofs are asphalt composition
yep.
shingles, where in other countries, they don't really have a re roofing industry where roofs are getting injured and damaged and then being replaced. They just put a roof on and they maintain it for hundreds of years. Um,
Fascinating.
but my father got into this with his father 36 years ago when they started the business out of my grandfather's house. And my dad now is, almost a 40-year veteran in this industry. And he has a separate kind of roof consulting company that he goes out as the roof expert and basically finds the clues on the roof and pieces together the story of what's happened to this roof from the time it was installed to that point. And people are paying him very well to do this because no one else has the ability to do that with roofing like he did, because he committed himself to understanding the science and the weather aspects of the roofing process.
Yeah.
And it's quite fascinating because there's not many people in his lane, so he's really niched in the US now. But I take it back to tracking, and my father is an
100%.
amazing hunter and loves the outdoors and everything, and it's a skill set that he has through that he has then, I think, found through roofing, and constantly we're like, when did this hailstorm hit? What direction did this hit? Why did it damage it
Yep.
this way? Was it rain? Was it plant matter? All these things I'm seeing, it's like we, as in the roofing industry, when we're interpreting the storms and the damages on these roofs or potential flaws in the material, it's a tracking process. We're using
100%.
the same neurological pathways in things as trackers.
Yep. Yep. Well said. Yeah, you're essentially Sherlock Holmes in roofs, the nature of
Yeah,
roofs. Yeah, totally.
and I find it quite fascinating because it's so engaging. Tracking in general, like, is such an immersive experience, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's made it to where it is quite a fun business to be in, and my dad is like so giddy and excited about
So
going out and
cool.
like finding sign. Like, a lot of people just get in the roofing business to make money and kind of move on, and they don't care really about either
Right.
side of the process. But he actually was like dedicated to really learning it, and he has taught all the people at our business how to do the same. It's pretty cool.
That's so cool. Well, and that's so cool too because it comes back to another sort of fundamental aspect of all of these things. Oh, excuse me, my phone is ringing. Um, and and that is really deep curiosity,
Yes.
where you get excited about a puzzle in front of you and being like, okay. And I think that is one of the draws, potentially fundamentally, as humans and throughout our evolutionary history. Um, just for one, the whole world is an amazing place with all kinds of cool stuff going on. And we, in particular, potentially, I mean, I think that all animals have very um, unique and really beautiful ways of sorting out things to the capacity that they need to do so. And
Hmm.
then we have this just wild processing organism or organ that just makes that stuff very far reaching. And it's just fun to hear about your dad getting giddy the same way I see trackers getting giddy, being like, "Oh, check this out.
Yes.
That looks like a drag mark. Look, there's some deer hair. There's a lion kill around here somewhere. Oh, sniff, sniff," and everybody gets all fired up, following little clues to a conclusion.
Yeah, no, it is funny. I just wanted to kind of share that with you and the
Yeah,
audience
that's
here,
awesome.
because it's so funny, and myself included in my own part of my development in our family business, and just also as an individual, has been, I always feel like I've been very curious in nature, but over the past few years, really committing myself more to my self-developmental journey is just
Hmm.
like so curious, almost to a detriment to myself at times, because I take in too much information and don't allow it
Sure.
to integrate it at times. But is just that ability to ask those questions. And now when I'm training younger people, or I'm with some of the people that I work with in the field, I'm starting to ask better questions of them in training, which is one, making the training of these individuals more engaging. But it's just, I'm no longer assuming that they might know how to look at that like my dad is or I am. And
Hmm.
what's cool is seeing these people start to develop that, rather than sending them out on their own and hoping that they find the same things as we do. When my dad goes to a roof, he's got 250 questions to ask. When a new
Exactly.
guy that's in training goes to a roof,
Right.
he might have 5 questions to ask. So it's that same
Exactly.
thing.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Um, well, just coming back, I wanted to circle around
Yeah.
to that personal journey of questioning. And one of the places that I do see that really, really clearly is on it is when we enter the whole world of trailing. So
Hmm.
for all your listeners out there, there's track and sign interpretation, which is our ability to wander a landscape and be able to actually interpret all kinds of very fragmentary evidence, but based on our base knowledge of all kinds of stuff, and be able to accurately assess tons of stuff going on out there from a whole wide variety of wildlife. And then there's the trailing side, which is our ability to find the right trail or a thread or a string of tracks and say, this is a fresh trail. This is the trail we want to follow to find these animals. And then moving through a landscape in such a way where we're really expanding our awareness to encompass all the other animal sign out there, our understanding of the behavior of the animal that we're following, listening to bird alarms or other alarms of animals, and putting all that together to be able to approach those animals without those animals seeing us, which really this is coming back to traditional hunting skills.
Hmm.
But with this really cool aspect tied in. But what's so fascinating about trail, especially when I'm working with folks who are newer to it, is people will approach trail the way they do life. And so you can have folks that might be sort of hyper confident or hyper aggressive that just charge down trail because they're like, this is where it's going, and then lose it very quickly, and then are a little bit stubborn on being like, well, and these are where these questions start coming in, being like, well, do you think that's your track or do you think this is your track? I mean, like, okay, cool. Or people may be like really tentative in their approach and want to just stand at a single track and literally talk out loud all of their options. And it's so fun to watch these different personalities do this. But one of the things that everybody does that I love, um, is that when someone moves out a trail, say we've got some tracks and you can see the tracks and they're like, there's my track, but the trail moves out into an area where, if we're in a little spot of woods, there might be a potential gateway or just an opening in the trees where the trail could certainly go that way, or the trail could go this way, or maybe the trail could go right down the middle. And what folks will do is they'll start going out, the tracks get really hard to see, and they'll go out and and they'll sort of follow some potential little marks or scuffs in the ground and be like, is this my trail? And they'll kind of get hung up in that, and they'll search all around in one of those options. And then they'll come back out and they'll start to go to one of their other options. And it's funny because especially when we're new at this, we don't always even see the other options. Even if we saw it very quickly, we get so sucked into one way of being, and then it's amazing. So you'll watch someone go out, they will do a very thorough search, certainly enough of a search that if there was something there they probably would see it, but then we start second guessing ourselves and we're like, and it's so wild because you'll see us drift off to the other potential routes, and then it's like the magnetic pull is too strong, and then they go right back to where they already searched and they'll pull back out and then right back to where they already searched. And I was like, oh my god, this is like the human condition. And I always think about this with myself where it's like, oh yeah, I know what it takes to live thrivingly. But for some
Yeah.
reason, I just keep pulling off to, binging Netflix or doing what,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh my God. And it's just so cool to see that reflected in this
Hmm.
particular art and science. And so
Yeah,
it's kind of
great
cool.
example. And being pretty fresh off my first trailing evaluation with Casey. And, for anyone listening that's interested in this, I highly recommend, even if you're very green to it, to challenge yourself and go to one of these events because you learn an immense amount about yourself. And Casey was my evaluator, and it was a really fun and engaging and challenging 2 days. And the substrate was quite challenging as well, and just the trails we did follow were challenging. But what I gathered, just like Casey just said, is how I kind of approach tackling problems or solving puzzles, and just how that applies to daily life in general and our life's path. Uh, I was um, on the trail, sometimes very confidently. In reflection at the end of this, when we get our scoring, we sit around in a circle, and Casey kind of shares with you positive and some constructive criticism on areas you can improve. One of my things was I would be confident on the trail. I'd start to pick up speed. I would move a little faster on the trail than was probably was desired, because I was going to miss potential information around me. And just in general, I definitely know that in life, uh, sometimes I'm moving too fast, or I'll move in sprints and then I'll slow down for a bit. Then I'll move in a sprint. And it was just a great reflection for me
Mm,
to understand and see that external reflection of, okay, like, let's slow down here a little bit, Jackson. And I have to constantly reel myself back in because I'm very ambitious. There's a lot of things I want to do. I have a lot of ideas and I know I can bring them to life. But if I'm just constantly like sprinting around and moving too fast, then I don't really enjoy this process of creation. And as I
mm,
move forward on my life path, really enjoying kind of that journey, right, than just that final destination. Because I know that all trackers, trailers know this is like, we want to get to that end point and find that animal, but we
mhm,
miss so much of that experience and that ritual of what's along the track, and what's being present and enjoying the day to day of our lives, instead of that point out here when we'll be the happiest, or you know everything will come together at this peak point, when really it's along the trail. But another
mm.
reflection and some feedback I received from Casey was, I'd be confidently grounded on that last track that I found, and I felt intuitively pulled to a specific area where I could glance forward and kind of see some potential sign, some flagging of some grass, and maybe a footprint on some substrate. But I was like, I need to go test my options. So I did this big loop out, and I went way too far and wide, way too fast. I feel like instead of really just casting out just
Efficiently.
very close in front of me,
Yeah.
until I did this. And then I pulled back, and Casey asked me the question, like, where do you feel that track is? Like, I feel the trail is this way. And he was like, are you looking, fully at that spot? And then I was like, oh, there's the track. But I kind of played this game with myself of casting out way too far and just trying to eliminate options, when the I intuitively knew the trail was right there. And if I would have slowed down,
Excuse me.
bless you, and really calmed myself down and just trusted myself more, that I
Yeah.
knew the trail was there, instead of trying all these other options for like 30 minutes and coming back. So,
Totally. Well, actually, you just gave me some insight that I'd
uh-huh.
never really thought about in this way. But and the way we talked about it with you in particular, because you're a very accomplished fisherman, was it was like you're good at casting out and being like
Yeah.
it could go that way. And so even though you had a track, if you'd been tuned to seeing where your trail was, you could actually in many cases see the next set of tracks. It was
Hmm.
just beyond where your brain was calibrated to at that point. And so you'd be like, well, that's it out there. And then you would check your lines, and you checked your lines really well, which was efficient in some ways. Had you been just being a little bit more connected to the trail. But what we do, and we all do this, is we're like, well, I'm not really seeing it here. And so then we're like, I'm going to go out here. And we tend to go much too far out and we get lost.
Yes.
And and like literally lost, which I think is such a cool metaphor for life because but the thing I just thought of where I was like, oh, this really comes back down to like the old cliche of like it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Yeah.
And it's like on trail, that's that it couldn't be truer because the journey in that case was having that groundedness and being like, here's my last track, here's the trajectory, what are my next steps? And you're like, oh, there's the track. And it's so simple for us. And I don't know why these things, again, this really seems to come down to human condition. I don't know why these things are so challenging. But it's like it's all right there in front of us. And yet our inclination is to be like, well, I don't really see anything right there. Maybe if I go out here, that's going to be the next best thing. And how good will it feel
Yes.
when I find it out here? Oh, it wasn't there. Oh, we'll go over here. And it's like, oh, but the way was right there the whole time, just waiting for us, and it's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, so interesting.
And I was fortunate, I think, to stumble across Boyd Vardy's work before I even got into tracking because it gave me a little bit of context as to how to look
Mm,
at it in this more philosophical way of like, he says a lot in his book, The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life, like, just find the next right track. We're
mm,
oftentimes casting out and he was like, when you get lost on your personal life track, he was like, bring yourself back to center and just find the next right track. You don't have to know how your career is going to end up 5 years down the road or the house you're going to get, the partner you're going to meet, etc. Even
yeah.
though we typically find ourselves like going in those directions and wanting to
Oh yeah.
understand and seek that out. But when we back up, he was like the best trackers that he's ever worked with have a great ability of just piecing together that next right track and also giving grace and not judging ourselves for going out and seeking and maybe
Totally.
being lost for some time, maybe
Oh
being
yeah.
in the wrong career path for a while, maybe being with the wrong
Yep.
partner for a while, and then coming back and being like, okay, I'm back on the last track where I knew, and then finding that next right partner or that next right career and being fueled by that once again of that reciprocal kind of energy loop of like, I'm back on track, that feeling of groundedness and anchored to
Yep.
yourself, to the planet. This is my direction.
Totally. Yeah. Well said. Um, and I think, I kind of grew up in a culture, which we don't have to get into, but some of the tracking culture that I grew up in
Uh-huh.
had a lot of this really, um, I don't know how to say it, uh, but the expectations were way too high. A master
Okay.
tracker never lost the trail. And
Hmm.
I was like, whoa, wow, you must. And then when you lose the trail, you feel terrible. And it turns out when I started working with really phenomenal trackers, I remember one of my favorite examples of this was when Mark Elbrock brought a group of the South African evaluators and Shangaan trackers over in 2007. And and it was just so cool. It was the first time that I had watched really amazing skill in action, and I was watching all these trackers in a landscape they had never been, working with animals they did not know. Just do They just made it look easy, and yet they would lose the trail. And I was like, this is so cool. And one of my favorite stories about that was and I cannot remember the gentleman's name, but it was so cool because I was in a small group, four or five people all together, and he was helping us follow. I don't even remember what we were following. We might have been following a bear. This is out in the desert, Southern California, and and it was so great. Somebody had been on point for a while, and then he pulled them off point, and it was my turn. And I was like, oh, I was kind of nervous. I was like, oh, I have to like trail in front of this phenomenally good tracker. And so I walked up, and he's like, here is your track. And I was like, sweet. And so I looked down at it, and I was like, wait. And it was a boot print. And I was all, dude, this is a boot print. And he leans over and he goes, so it is. Hold on. And he looks around. He's like, here is your trail. And I was like, thanks. And it wasn't like, oh no.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh shit, my bad. We're looking at scuffs on the ground. I've chose the wrong scuff. This is actually your scuff over here. And there was no like there
Interesting.
in the so much of the culture I grew up in, it was like, oh, you got to be the best all the time, and and um, and and the cool thing, coming back to what we were just talking about, is that um and tying it into that bigger look at life and being alive is that it's really good tracking skill is not about staying on the trail without losing it. We're all going to lose the track. The best trackers in the world lose the trail. It's about our ability to re-find the trail again that really separates the just phenomenal from folks that have less experience. And so it's such a cool way. And tying back to what you were just saying, it's like, oh yeah, the grace for which we hold ourselves, it's like, dude, we're gonna lose the trail. Things are gonna get rough. Things are gonna get dark. Things are gonna get depressing. We're not gonna know who we are or where we're going. But it's like, but if we just keep working at it, it's just about actually finding the trail again, whatever that means. And so that was just such a though that way of framing what good trailing was so helpful for me. And I think the larger leap and the more continual internal process is remembering life as the trail and being like, right on. Yep, I kind of went down the wrong way for a little while.
Yeah.
But I'm back now on that
Yeah.
anchor track, reoriented to who I am, to myself. And we talk about that with the anchor track. It's like the anchor track isn't it's so cool because it's reorienting to the trail, but it is so fascinating because the anchor track reorients us to everything. It essentially reorients us to the entire cosmos. It's like,
Hmm.
oh yeah. And when you can see this and everybody working trail, it's like you can see what it looks like when we don't know where it is and the eyeballs are kind of spinning. We get into kind of tunnel vision and we're like, oh, our brain's freaking out.
Hmm.
And you can see what happens when somebody reconnects with their trail. It's like everything clicks back into place. It's like, and all of a sudden they're oriented to themselves again. They're oriented to the animal that they are following, whatever that may mean in the bigger picture of life lessons. And they're oriented to the whole landscape again. And they're like, oh yeah, because when we're lost out there, we're no longer connected to the landscape either. The trail kind of could have gone anywhere, but when we are on that thread of tracks, everything out ahead of us makes much more sense. There's still options to have to choose from, which is always an internal tension, but we're at least reoriented to these very clear threads that this animal is most likely going to take, and it's that anchor track is just like it's magic. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I appreciate that example and some further, exploration on that topic. I just, through sharing that of that gentleman with just how much, with how he handled that, oh, like, I will find the right track. I just find in myself an over criticism, an over expectation, and a lack of grace if I get something wrong. Like if I don't interpret that right, like beating myself up, something that I know I need to grow in my grace for myself in that aspect. And that's so beautiful with that tracker being able to really have that. And it goes back to a deep level of probably, self acceptance as you are in the human
Mm-hmm.
condition and knowing that we make mistakes and we're not perfect.
Yep. Yep.
Very cool.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I know we've been really diving super deep here, but to kind of pull us out for a second, maybe, what is one of your favorite animals in specific to interpret, track, and sign of? I know that you recently uh, worked on a book of North American bird nests and bird feathers, but I don't know if that's your answer. But just to kind of throw another question out there.
Yeah. Um, I get that question fairly frequently, and I do have an answer, but I think one of the cool things, and what tracking is really doing for us is it's a very thorough introduction to life and to how amazing life is in all of its representations. And so like I get really excited seeing beautiful little jumping mouse tracks and being like, dude, jumping mice are phenomenal little animals. They're just so cool, and they do all kinds of cool stuff, and they're built weird, um, and and little birds. Speaking of like the bird nest guide was one of that was our most recent work, and in the field guide realm anyway. I worked on that with Matt Mongello and my colleague David Moskowitz, who's also with Cybertracker. But that turned out to be a project that really blew my mind and opened my mind in all kinds of ways, because birds and nests and a very intensive study of that, what it was like a ecological education in a way I did not expect, where it was like, oh, all these birds of all different kinds have been fitting into every single possible niche on the planet, from rainforests to Arctic conditions to extreme deserts, and doing all of these little things. And in the study of nests, it was just such a cool way of looking at how birds experience and see planet Earth, and all of these different ecosystems. And it was like, whoa. And then, not to mention too, one of the things I love about little birds is migratory species. These little birds that will end up in Wyoming, and knowing full well who bison are, who grizz are, wolves. They know the sound of bugling elk. Potentially, it might be a little early for bugling elk by the time they head south, but they carry with them, a little female
Mm-hmm.
carries with them all of this knowledge of animals and landscapes, and the appearance of the Tetons, and then all this country between there and South America. And then they land in South America, and she's flitting around preening on a branch, and knows she knows tapirs and jaguars and predatory snakes that she needs to watch out for, and like all this stuff, whole different soundscapes, even in the human realm. The human language is different. The sounds that she hears and recognizes as part of home spans so much of the planet. And in that teeny little light bird skull, she encompasses so much knowledge about planet Earth. And it's just like, dude, if I could live in the brain of a little yellow warbler for 5 minutes and just know what she knows, it's like, dude, it's incredible. And so animals are just badass. And you think about that. And then local species that don't go have their own um, very deep knowledge of a place throughout all the seasons. And you're like, damn, chickadees from the summer through the fiercest winters. And you're just like, God damn. And I love that about animals, just like how they experience Earth is so rich and so raw. It's just so Earth. And we have that to a degree, but we've been able to buffer ourselves from it in so many ways. But and so I just animal, knowing tracks and sign isn't really about knowing tracks and sign. It's about knowing animals,
Mm-hmm.
and relating and connecting to their lives as so similar to ours, despite all these differences that we may perceive, and just appreciating who they are and what they do. And so I just get excited about all kinds of animals. They're phenomenal. But there are some critters that I get particularly excited about. I love elk. I just, and I love deer. But elk sign, following elk, there's just something about that. Who elk are in the world is really cool to me. And the other one, I spent several years doing mountain lion research, as a field technician, and got to spend a lot of time on lion trails and visiting all their kill sites and checking out their beds and just learning about lions, and doing my best to see the world the way they saw the world, the way they see the world. And I learned a lot about them and about myself. And every time when I find lion trails and tracks, but especially when I have the opportunity to follow lions, I get very, very excited. That lion, I saw your blog this morning when I was trying to brush up on
Hmm.
everything that you're up to in the world, and you mentioned those lion tracks we found there in Tijeras,
Yeah,
in
that
New
was awesome.
Mexico, and I just got so excited following that cat out. And then I actually went back after that, and we'd
Uh-huh.
had some gnarl winds and a little bit of rain, and I was like, well, I'm going to still see if I can cast way out ahead
Hmm.
because there was private property and all this stuff. And I looked all over. I never did cut his trail again. It was erased from the world, at least to my eye. And but yeah, there's just something about that I just love. And but yeah, it's hard to choose for sure.
I get it. I get it. It's a tough question, especially for someone like you. So thanks for that answer. Yeah, the bird example is super fascinating and really kind of just makes me think about a book I read a few years ago called Limitless by Jim Quick, who is a brain coach, and he just talks about like how to, harness the power of our brains and like unlock the power of our mind. And specifically, one of the myths he debunks about humans is like we have X amount of access to our brain, et cetera, and like intelligence is fixed for people. So some people are smart, some people are not. And if you think about that tiny bird skull, that tiny bird brain, but yet how intelligent that critter really is, it if you can really reflect inward and realize like we have a much bigger brain, but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily more intelligent than this bird.
Mm-hmm.
But what it also means is we could be just as intelligent as this bird if we unlimit ourselves to the things that have limited to us to our current paradigm. And I think that's
Yeah,
just where you get in the conversation of consciousness. And I know a lot of people, it can kind of become a very ethereal and uncomfortable conversation about, the elevation of consciousness on our planet and things like that. But really, the way I see it simply is just that, like all these animals are harnessing a greater consciousness that's a collective consciousness, and it's not that our brains are bigger than theirs or they're smaller than ours. It's what they're tapping into on a conscious level.
mm-hmm.
So if we too as humans can tap into that greater collective consciousness, which I believe track and trailing as this ancient skill set begins to unlock that for us, then we can improve the level of our consciousness, which improves our pattern recognition, our understanding of the planet, the cosmos, and ourselves.
100%. Yeah, and I mean, I one of the things that I like that you just spoke really clearly to is like with this skill set, what happens is that someone may understand there's black bears on the landscape, and they're like, "There's bears out here," and and but who bears are in their mind might just be like a bear. Bears eat honey or
Yeah,
whatever,
a Pooh
like
Bear.
out there yeah, somewhere there's a bear looking for honey. And this isn't trying to be mean or anything, but it's just our cultural appreciation and understanding for so much of wildlife kind of boils down a lot to those types of things. Just like, oh yeah, a little bird doing bird stuff. Yeah, they like fly around and they have eggs. I think they make eggs and like um and 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 what happens with track and sign is that for one, it is an introduction. It goes from like there's bears on the landscape, and I think bears eat honey. And then it's like, oh snap, here is a bear track on the landscape, and they're like, that's a bear track. I'm and all these questions like, well, is this the biggest boar on the landscape? And I was like, I don't know. It's like, well, how much? And so who is this bear? Maybe it's a little teeny bear track. Maybe it's, and it's like, well, is how big is this bear? Like, say it's maybe about two softballs size, or maybe like a softball and a half size. And it's like, well, is that this year's cub? Maybe it's July. And it's like, I don't know how. I'm just like, yeah, they would be considerably smaller, but is this a big bear? And it's like, no, maybe this is a yearling. Maybe this is last year's bear. And all of a sudden there's a yearling black bear wandering around on the landscape. And they're like, all of a sudden there's bears on the landscape too. There was a bear, a young bear, a little yearling right here. And I was like, cool. And then it's like, what do bears do? And they're like, where's this bear going? And they're like, and depending on where we are on the landscape, it's like, oh, maybe it's out in the pinon juniper forest right now, and it gets hot in the day. Well, bears are super sensitive to heat. Do you think this track was made in the middle of the day? I was like, no, it's too hot for bears. And I was like, okay, cool. What is this bear doing? And it's like, well, maybe bears eat pinon nuts, pine nuts. And you're like, yeah, they mow them. And they're like, what? And it's like, I bet this bear is wandering here, just snarfing up pinon nuts. And it's like, right on. It was probably late in the evening or super early in the morning. And then we're like, where is this bear right now? Well, not bedded up in the heat in the pinon juniper down here. And it's like, well, where's the next coolest place on the landscape? Maybe there's some dark timber up a north facing slope on the other side of a little valley, or maybe there's a thick riparian area that's just deep shade, cooler from the water there running through the desert. And it's like, that bear is either up there in the conifer forest or down there in all that riparian thicket. We go down in there, on the way you see a pinon scat, just a big log just filled with pine nut shells, and they're like, what? And then boom, we find a bed, beautiful bear bed, some scats around it, and you're just like, no way. And all of a sudden the story starts unfolding, and when people leave that day, who bears are so different. And it's not even just who bears are. In their mind, they have a single bear that, whether they came in intentionally to do so, they have a connection to that bear. And they could drive by that spot 100 times, and every time they drive by, they'll be like, remember that bear in there? I wonder where that bear's at right now. And it changes things. And then, of course, we're looking at all kinds of sign of all kinds of different animals. And when someone leaves that experience with, all this new, like coyotes and gray foxes and bobcats and muskrats and beaver and porcupines and black bears, it's like they leave just filled with real stories that it does change consciousness. All of a sudden, we are much more conscious about animals and about individual animals and real lives. And, we might find kills, we might find scats with hairs in them, with like, where other animals were consumed. And we start getting into like the life and death process. And, in many ways, very good tracking really boils down to just understanding death, which is really interesting, like the cycles, and being like, whoa, we're just like in a big old composting machine that's just churning life into death back and forth, and then we're just part of it and experiencing it, conscious of it all, and watching all these animals dance it out, and ourselves. And you're like, whoa. And it's very transformative in that way. Which is so cool because it's both internal but also external to the world. And this very, when we talk about building compassion and just deep empathy and relationship, this skill set is really, really fascinating for it.
Beautifully put. It seems so simple at first, but it's just its application and its fundamental skill development and heart emotion development and brain development on every level is just continues to floor me, and what we've shared here today is just continued to grow my interest and fascination with this ancient practice that really, quite frankly, was formative to our species in general, yet we've been so detached from it. And that kind of parlays us into a good question I wanted to ask you, which is, you know, are you witnessing an increasing interest from people, maybe globally, but especially North America, um, in coming to track and trailing evaluations comparative to, the early 2000s?
Oh,
Because you've been in it a while. So,
big time. Um, I just was realizing that I can watch my mic, and I've peaked out a bunch. So when I get excited, I'm hoping I didn't blow out the audio too much. Um, but yeah, it's so the interest in this particular thing has been skyrocketing. It's really cool, and and the interest across all kinds of different communities, which is really neat and exactly what we want. And part of this is just putting really intensive effort into helping us get exposure to the world.
mhm,
And exposure really means helping folks understand what the skill set actually is, which still really, it has been one of the hardest things to try to capture, like in writing
mhm.
and on websites and stuff, what actually happens to human beings when they start diving into this particular process. And and so a lot of that exposure really happens when folks show up and then just dive into all kinds of cool stuff and leave different. And and then word of mouth, of course, is just phenomenal that way. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool. I've graphed out our growth, and we've just for years and years. We started back in 2004 running the first certifications here, and then around 2013 there was a little rise that went to about 2019, and then it went up a little bit then, but then dropped in 2020 because it was 2020. And then since then it's just steadily climbing. We ran 115 certifications last year, and
Wow.
working with all kinds of different groups, and so it's taking hold, which is phenomenal
Hmm.
because it still remains an unknown art, dying science, and that's part of the Cyber Tracker mission and Tracker certification mission, is just to make sure that this skill set lives and is embraced, it's understood, and that it's applied. And so yeah, things are happening. There's so much more interest, and um, it's been really great working with with more and more biologists and agency folks, and then other folks like in the ranching community that are able to apply these things very quickly in
Hmm.
their own work, and just to watch yet again people be like, what? I This skill set is so cool. I just didn't have an understanding of what was actually going on and what it took from me. And funny enough, I know I'm kind of all over the map here, but one thing I hear over and over and over again from all different kinds of folks looking at it, approaching it, and applying it in different ways is being like, I didn't really realize that so much of this is just about slowing down and allowing ourselves the opportunity, because now we know that in order for information to reveal itself, we have to ask questions. And so that's one of the coolest parts of this work, is to watch people just get thrown right in and be like, who made this track? Which foot is it? And they're like, oh, and to watch people kneel down around a track and look at it and watch them process, which is the entire heart of what the skill set is, and process, come up with an answer no matter what it is. It doesn't matter. It's the act of doing that again and again and again, and then getting all of this feedback and cool information, backfilling a lot of that vacuum that the process created. And then people are like, oh, okay, this is how I approach the skill set, and this is what it means, um, to glean information from the landscape, which is really cool.
Amazing. It's very exciting to hear the trajectory at which tracking is being embraced, and kind of like what you shared at the beginning. More developments that y'all are beginning to formulate and put into implementation is amazing to see. I can't wait to see where this goes for you and your colleagues and everyone associated, myself included, and all the other amazing people I've met and will meet in the future that are coming into this skill set, alongside just being in such a, very tumultuous and changing time on the planet. It's
Yeah.
what I have personally feel like one of the most significant things is for me in this skill set, and I think for others too, is this incredibly grounding quality and tethering quality back to ourselves and back to the earth
Mm.
in a time where media and politics and, just all these things can rattle our minds. When you get on the track and you just get outdoors in general, brings you back home, back to that anchor. And the more you trust that and realize that can do that, I think it's settling us a lot more. And we
Mm.
live in a time where our nervous systems, from a neurological perspective, are so, fried, burn out, in a constant fight or flight state. And in a few days in nature, or, these immersive experiences like these track and trailing events have that. It's almost like a walking meditation of sorts. It's an active meditation, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
Of, you do it and then you realize kind of after, oh my gosh, like I'm calmer, I'm more content, I'm more grounded, I'm anchored. And that is something from my studies in yoga and neuroscience and psychedelic assisted therapy, and those things that I have seen um, are very important aspects of all that work. What it's doing is it's grounding our nervous systems. So nervous system
Nice.
regulating practices are, I feel like, becoming very popular, and we're drawing to them because we see what it's doing for ourselves. And as we do that on an individual level, we co-regulate with other human beings. So if the
True
more of us
enough.
can become grounded, we bring that ground to our areas. And it is a constant practice. Like we said throughout this podcast, we're going to get off track, we're going to get spun
Yeah.
up.
Oh yeah.
But to know that this is a practice that can anchor us.
Yep. 100%. It's very good at that.
So kind of closing out here, Casey, I always like to ask, when you hear the phrase live thrivingly, how do you individually interpret this?
I was afraid you were well, funny enough, yeah, I was thinking about that coming here, and it made me really contemplate my own life and my own strengths in that regard, my own weaknesses in that regard, and of which I have both for sure. And but I was like, oh yeah, living thrivingly, um, and to there's a number of things. I mean, for me, when I'm at my best, um, it's just the simple stuff. I'm taking care of myself. I'm sleeping well, and then I'm naturally excited. And what it comes down to for me a lot is when I have spontaneous curiosity, I know I'm doing all right. When I don't, I know that I'm off kilter, and and I need to check back in. But yeah, I was like, oh, and being curious for me in a sort of thriving way. It's funny because I'm sort of afraid of that word thriving
Yeah.
because I don't know that I'm always thriving. I feel very overwhelmed, overworked, tired.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, which I think is just the sort of phase I'm in life right now too.
Hmm.
And yet I can still, even when things are rough, I can still, for the most part, find curiosity, which even just means like, oh, I bet, just getting excited about exercising,
Yeah.
doing something. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Those little glimmers of that. And so, yeah, curiosity for me and appreciation, awe is really fundamental for me about thriving. Like I just I want awe. I want that capacity to be like, that is insane. Like that is the coolest thing ever, because that drives me. And it drives every aspect of my life, from instruction in the field to pursuing my own practice. Um, and but it is true, like, and I was thinking about this, and when I'm running certifications, um, it is work and it's hard work. So it's not always the same as like when I'm out munching an apple and come across something and check it out. But
Yeah.
I still can get so fired up, and I love seeing other folks get fired up and make those connections. And so that really helps um, carry me forward. And but I was thinking about like when I'm kind of in my most thriving zone. And a lot of times that comes down to when I'm in an incredible, beautiful area with tons of wildlife sign, and I'm just checking it all out. And I am just like saturated in life. And I'm like, damn, bad at, oh, look at that. Oh, same thing happens really, really potently on trail. So,
Hmm.
when Kevin and I cut that lion track, I just went full on into trail mode, and I am just happy. And this comes back. Actually, that reminds me, there's a documentary. I don't know where to find it anymore. It was on YouTube for a while. And it was the same community with Nate, that has a lot of the origins of Cybertracker that Louis has worked really closely with. And they made a documentary about a persistence hunt, but it's all really about tracking. It's called The Great Dance. And one of the phrases in there is that, oh gosh, now I'm blanking on it, but um, something along the lines of that when you're tracking, your body is happy.
Yes.
And it's like, oh yeah, I have felt that so much. And then the other thing on that same piece is when I step into hunting, I everything comes together in these really interesting ways where I'm just like, I just am at my clearest state, even in the chaos of my mind and the ups and downs. I'm just so present to life and to the activity that I'm doing. And so I figured that question would come up, and made me think about all of those things. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks for piecing that together with us here. I know it's a quite loaded question, and at times the answer, or at least in that moment, what we resonate with the most comes through clear. And we have had such a deep and very uh, you know immersed podcast here today, so the brain's a little bit fatigued by the end of the podcast to ask such a big question. But I really appreciate you sharing that with us today and kind of piecing that together, and even to the point kind of pointing out as well, like you're and admitting to a little bit of the fear with that question. It's
Hmm.
something that I definitely want to look into in moving forward with this Live Thrivingly project, which, getting back into the podcasting again, I'll be doing more of these episodes again. And if people check out my website, you'll see the Live Thrivingly project, where I'm actually archiving all of these answers from people like Casey, everyday people at the top of their fields that I'm bringing on podcasts, or I'm just meeting in a coffee shop on the side of the road. And I want to build an archive and a database of these different answers, and create eventually write a book on capturing these
Awesome.
answers. So then you're able to read, and it could almost be like a page a day kind of thing. And just to spark some deeper questioning, like we said in this podcast, those questions and those ideas, and how other people are living their lives, and little tidbits, little feathers we can collect from the way other people live around the globe, and how that could potentially influence our quality of life.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
Casey, where can people find you if they want to connect, or maybe share a little bit about Cyber Tracker and its offerings?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say, keep the question. I think it's a great question,
Yeah,
and it's the best kind of question because it is challenging. And just like everything we've talked about, questions are what reveal stuff. So I think it's great.
I appreciate
um,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And but anyway, so folks can look up so my website, caseymcfarland.net. You can just check stuff out there. I don't do a whole lot on that website, but if they'd like to look into it, that's great. I'm on Instagram, but I am terrible at posting stuff, trying to be better, but I've been saying that for 10 years. But that's at Of the Farland, I believe is my Instagram handle. And I've been doing the best I can, stretched very thin, dabbling in YouTube and trying to put some stuff up there just because it's such an accessible platform. And so I think, and again, this shows just how um, out of the loop I am in all the socials. But I think on YouTube, if you just look up Casey McFarland, you can find me. And um, if that doesn't work, there's a video up called King Snake versus Massive Rattlesnake, which is pretty cool. And so that's a way to find me on YouTube if all my vague
Yeah.
instructions here don't work. But so interest in wildlife tracking as a skill set, go to trackercertification.com. And Tracker Certification is our nonprofit that we created to really ensure that the cyber tracker process, which comes out of South Africa, um, and the whole skill of wildlife tracking lives long into the future in North America and beyond. And we're a nonprofit. We raise money, we take donations to both support the growth of CyberTracker, but also to do things like create scholarships or access funds for folks that traditionally have had challenges getting into wildlife fields and to partake. And so check that out. We've got a whole calendar on there. We run them all over North America. It doesn't matter if you are brand new, have never even looked at a track in your life, show up. It will be incredibly impactful on the way you see the world and our place in it. Um, and yeah, I think that's probably everything from my side.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Casey. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to spend it with us. I hope everyone who's listened to this point has thoroughly enjoyed this episode and perhaps is going to get out there and on trail or track soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. Super cool work that you're doing, Jackson.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Live Thrivingly podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Hall, and I hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to help you thrive in both your personal and professional life. Remember, the journey to living thrivingly is one step at a time, and we're here to walk that path with you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with someone who could benefit from these conversations. For more resources and updates, be sure to visit my website at livethrivingly.com or visit my social media page at Instagram at livethrivingly. And as always, continue to live thrivingly because you deserve to live a life full of purpose, vitality, and joy. Until next time, take care and keep thriving.